Good evening to you all. Good afternoon and good morning, depending where you are. I'm sorry for we are late by 10 minutes, but we will try to be on time after this. I would like to welcome to our speakers, Her Excellency Hirut Zemene, Ambassador of Ethiopia to Belgium, Luxembourg, and all EU institutions. His Excellency Denise Kohde, Presiding Officer of the African Union, the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council, or the ECOSOCC. His Excellency Ambassador David Comissiong, Ambassador of Barbados to CARICOM, Deacon Yosef from Manawork, Tafari, Dr. Biniam Misgun, and Brother Rutendo Matinyarare. I also would like to welcome our host tonight, Defend Ethiopia Task Force Steering Committee compatriots, our Pan-African compatriots, and to all of you, the audience tonight who are here with us. We warmly welcome you all. Please allow me to thank our speakers, all of them who without any hesitation accepted our proposal to speak on this timely subject, sanctions and their impacts on countries. Sanctions are increasingly, this webinar tonight is actually organized on the background of that sanctions are increasingly being used as a camouflage of Western political dominance, imposing their foreign policy objectives. Here, the case in point is Ethiopia. Some analysts argue that the bill HR6600, announced as Ethiopia Stabilization, Peace and Democracy Act, and S3199, announced as Ethiopia Peace and Democracy Promotion Act, are contrary to their announced intent. It's a continued attempt for a regime change to fulfill US interests or weaken the government. In order for us to understand these bills of sanctions against Ethiopia, it's important to look at countries in our continent and across Atlantic. In doing so, the discussion tonight will shed light on the bills, which I mentioned above, HR6600 and S3199, and its impacts, the impacts of sanctions in Cuba, Eritrea, Zimbabwe, and what are also, we look at the intention of these sanctions. Have sanctions been effective in forcing unilateral Western foreign policy objective on other sovereign countries world over? What are the lessons to draw from those who encounter these sanctions? And what are the solutions put in place by continental institutions and intergovernmental organizations? Having said that, before going to our keynote speaker tonight, I would like to invite my colleague Ato Kadao from Defend Ethiopia Task Force to tell us about Defend Ethiopia. Yeah, Ato Kadao, over to you.
Thank you, Mahlet. Dear Ambassador Hirut and distinguished panelists, allow me to thank you, just like Mahlet did, to thank you for accepting to participate in this webinar. And thank you, Mahlet, for bringing such really a great panel together in a short time. Really great work. So let me start by saying a few words about Defend Ethiopia. So Defend Ethiopia is a group of volunteers. We're a group of volunteers, and the group was established in November 2020, a few days after TPLF attacked the Northern Command Force, as you may remember. And this group was established after noticing that TPLF's efforts to disinform the world by providing wrong narrative about the situation in Ethiopia using mainstream media and social media. So as a group of volunteers, we are mainly engaged in public diplomacy endeavors to combat disinformation campaign, to provide accurate information and redress the narrative since the conflict erupted, We have active members in 12 European countries who are very active in monitoring the trend on social media and locally on the local media, on the local mainstream media, and try to increase the footprint of the Ethiopian cause through all available means. Mainly these included running Twitter campaigns. We have also done a lot of email and letter campaigns to parliamentarians and key influencers in the European landscape. We have also organized rallies in many cities in Europe. We have also organized a series of debates and discussions such as this one to shed light on the situation in Ethiopia, worked on grassroots activism seeking the participation of other groups who are engaged in similar endeavors. This calls for the occasion to call on all Ethiopians to work together hand in hand when appropriate, because united action is needed more than ever now. Now, coming to the sanctions and their impacts on country, Mahlet has very eloquently introduced the topic. And as you all know, since the conflict erupted in late 2020, some US senators and sympathizers of the TPLF have been calling for the imposition of sanctions on Ethiopia. Enjoying peace, stabilization, democracy, and all these nice words is what those bills promise in their titles. Yet the ordinary people are the ones who are likely to pay the ultimate price. We know that sanctions will worsen the economic hardship of Ethiopians, but will they resolve the conflict? And what are the previous cases? What lessons can we learn from previous cases such as Zimbabwe and Cuba, as Mahlet explained? This is what we expect as an outcome from this webinar. So with this, thank you, Mahlet, and back to you.
You're so right. Sorry, I was trying to get one of our speakers on the phone. Okay, please allow me to introduce our keynote speakers tonight, Her Excellency Ambassador Hirut Zemene, and also allow me to say a few words about her. Her Excellency Ambassador Hirut Zemene is appointed as Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia to the Kingdom of Belgium, Luxembourg, and EU institutions in May 2020. Before assuming her current post, she has held ministerial positions. She was State Minister of Foreign Affairs for Political Affairs in regions Africa, Middle East, and Public Diplomacy from 2018 to 2020, and State Minister of Political Affairs in charge of all bilateral and multilateral matters from 2016 to 2018. Prior to that, Her Excellency also has served as the Foreign Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia in various positions as Director General of Business Diplomacy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as Minister Counselor in charge of Business Diplomacy and Multilateral Affairs at Embassy of Ethiopia. In the UK, Director of LDCs and LLDCs Directorate at MOFA, meaning Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Senior Second Secretary, Counselor, Asia and the Middle East Directorate General, Second Secretary of Political and Development Cooperation Officer at Embassy of Ethiopia to People's Republic of China, and Desk Officer for USA on the Interim Desk Office for Canada for 6 months as Third Secretary as well. Her Excellency Ambassador Hirut Zemene graduated from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, USA. Ambassador Hirut, over to you.
Thank you very much, Waziri Mahlet. Just one point on my small background that you have made kindly, and I thank you for that. I always want to align myself with my university, the Addis Ababa University. So the first degree that I did is in my country, Ethiopia, in the famous Addis Ababa University. So That's the best of the times that I can remember in education life. I'd like to start by thanking the Defend Ethiopia Europe and the Defend Ethiopia chapter coordinator Wezero Mahlet. In fact, she's the one that has invited me to make an opening remark. It is quite important for the team to select this very topical issue that relates to the HR6600 draft bill that was initiated by the House of Representatives, which we also famously follow that there is a twin brother in the Senate, which is called S3199, another resolution that has been actually, that has passed the foreign relations process, committee process, just I think early this week or a few days back. What a sugar-coated resolution, as the name suggests. It suggests, it says that Ethiopia, it is the act is Ethiopia Stabilization, Peace and Democracy Act, but nothing that much to this title that we find in it. And I know many of the Ethiopian compatriots that have taken time in digging into this resolution have tried to create awareness to Ethiopians and Ethiopians at home and the diaspora at large about the contents of it, how it is going to run, and what it means for Ethiopia. So I will not delve into that, but I will try to give a very general remark on that. But before I do that, it would be a great honor for me to say a few things about my country, Ethiopia, our country. Ethiopia is a nation with a colorful history. It had put important marks in human history through its struggle against injustice and upholding the principle of fair international order. It believes in Black power during the times of challenges at the beginning of the 19th century, while it never looked in partisan on any other nation. The victory of Adwa of 1896, which we just celebrated recently, was none other than a victory over injustice and a symbol of freedom to many across the world under colonial subjugation. Ethiopia was on the forefront in the quest for upholding a fair international order through its participation in the non-aligned movement since the 1950s. This is a very important group that is trying to ascertain independence in terms of points of views in our international engagements. We can engage to promote our national interest without aligning to any bloc. I think those groups that joined the non-aligned movement had these principles at the heights of the Cold War, which is still getting relevant right now. I'm sure you'll agree with me. It is also a founding member of the League of Nations in the 1920s, and then its predecessor, the United Nations. It is, again, one of the important founding members of the Organization of African Unity and its successor, the African Union. So in all this, it has tried to also
Ambassador, you are muted.
Must have been muted from the system.
Okay.
Or maybe I might have touched it without knowing, I'm sorry. Is it okay now?
Yes.
Okay. The Ethiopia today faces mixed stories. It's in transition. It had had a democratic election in June 2021 with an overwhelming turnout, while it was under a challenging situation where it sustained an attack on the Northern Command of the National Defense Force from within by our brethren from the TPLF clique. My point that links us to the topic at hand would start here. Which country would be expected to stand idly by while its sovereignty is challenged in this way? It was the constitutional duty of the government to check this attack. However, this effort by the government of Ethiopia to maintain the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country was not seen fairly, and currently there is a heightened campaign going on to unjustly sanction this government or sanction the entire Ethiopia. Among the countries which frequently use unilateral sanctions as a coercive diplomatic instrument is, of course, the United States of America. This pattern has continued, and the US House of Representatives is currently processing a new sanction regime on Ethiopia. I have noted the name and everybody knows it, HR6600, which was drafted by Congressman Malinowski of New Jersey. Similar document with the title S3199 is also being considered by the Senate. It has been already considered at the Foreign Relations Committee, as you know, recently. These bills, if adopted, will have grave economic, social, political, and security consequences on Ethiopia. They do not have the best interests of Ethiopians or the United States. They do not take into account the complicated problems in Ethiopia and fail to recognize facts on the ground, but instead focus on alienating a democratically elected government. They push innocent Ethiopians, exacerbate existing problems. They punish innocent Ethiopians, exacerbate existing problems, create power vacuum, and drive Ethiopian-American relations in the wrong direction. Furthermore, the bills are drafted without
Tashay, Ambassador muted ሆነዋል.
Okay. Let me repeat few lines in case if I was not heard. Furthermore, the bills are drafted without consideration of the current progress in Ethiopia and the interests of the majority of Ethiopians and those of Ethiopian Americans. These heavily handed and one-sided bills would alienate Ethiopia by further pushing a democratically elected Ethiopian government through ever more punitive sanctions. While Ethiopians have been the victims of maladministration and mismanagement by the TPLF for the last 30 years, the bills place much of the blame on the new Ethiopian government instead of the wrongdoers, the insurrectionists who started the conflict and remain the main aggressors still. The bills do not try to hold the TPLF clique accountable for its previous or current aggressions and human rights violations that is escalating the humanitarian crisis in northern Ethiopia. Policies and or congressional actions that fail to take into account the truth on the ground are dangerous and embolden negative elements to continue aggression and invasion to gain power by force. This kind of partisan approach, actually, will destabilize the broader region by risking the lives of thousands and contributing to the humanitarian challenges. Putting a verdict in the way the bills drafted by the US Senate and House of Representatives intend to do will not be the answer. This is because Ethiopia did not turn blind eyes to the humanitarian situation in the northern part of Ethiopia, despite sabotage that were hampering the delivery of assistance. Furthermore, Ethiopia has fielded its own investigation on alleged human rights violations while allowing international bodies such as the UN OCHA, together with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, to investigate wrongdoings. The transition in Ethiopia that came through popular will, the sanction in Ethiopia that came through popular will in 2018 needed care and support from the international community and not a collaborative media campaign of disinformation and misinformation. These actions, such as what the House of People's Representatives and the Senate are doing through the above mentioned bills. So, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen present here, what we would need to do as Ethiopians, friends of Ethiopia, is that we need to engage, because Ethiopia is not new in relationships, in diplomacy, and in creating understanding. It has done so wonderfully in the past, and it can do this again. So we've said that we are a country of non-aligned. I think there is a background somewhere. We have said that we are a country of non-aligned movement. We have said that we are the founding members of the most noted international organizations and institutions. We have the largest fleet of peacekeeping operations around the world under Blue Helmet. We have tried to solve problems within our regions when we could. So we need to be understood, and our values is beyond our borders. This is a country of hard working, largely agrarian society that are have a great zeal in them through entrepreneurship. They know how to make friendship. They know how to support where countries are in need. In many ways, we don't have enough time even to talk about it. So we are a nation that could create understanding and revert challenges such as this one. So I'm sure the representatives, the participants here, I see also Deacon Yosef, who had elaborately been, explaining about these two bills, its significance, what it means to Ethiopia, its impact, and where it is now. So I wouldn't, claim to get into those bills and, explain in detail, but I can assure you that Ethiopians have the will to explain issues when they come, in the way that they are challenging us. So this is the time to explain to the United States community, friends of Ethiopia, the congressmen, the Senate, and many around the world, that it is a very, very unjust proposition to craft such kind of draft bill that instead of supporting 100+ million population that has shown in many ways are very, very resilient people, and when they can't supportive to themselves, to the others, it is not a fair proposition to put a sanction on 110 million population and to, take them to abject poverty to affect women in development, affect the small holder farmers, the small and medium enterprises, traders, investors. This is what it means, as I'm sure you will be alluding to in your discussions further. Sanctions do not harm governments necessarily in incumbent governments. The impacts are largely on the society. So this is where I think we should come together as a nation. The sanctions are not about governments, it's about people. So this is the time for us to come together and elaborately explain to friends of Ethiopia that this untimely, imbalanced, and very, very bad resolution, draft resolution, to be stopped. And especially if people listen to the efforts that are ongoing in the country, including the indefinite humanitarian truce that was announced recently, there is a lot of reason, in addition to the dialogue, the national dialogue that's going to commence, there is a lot of reason to make a stop of this resolution. So diplomats, Ethiopian diplomats around the world, friends of Ethiopia, and then Ethiopians around the world, we need to work hand in hand in averting this very detrimental resolution. And I'm sure if we stand united, we can do that. And I wish you a wonderful deliberation and discussion. Thank you again for inviting me for this discussion. I thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, really, for that opening remark. And also, thank you. I would like to thank my colleague Ketao for briefly introducing Defend Ethiopia prior to the opening remark. Ambassador, Her Excellency Ambassador Hirut is traveling between her hectic time. She spared this time, so thank you very much. She might not stay until the end. Actually, she took her time off, also the closing remark. That's why she took more than the allocated time. And I kept quiet, but thank you. It was important points. So our next speakers, I really have a pleasure to introduce Deacon Yosef Romano Tafari, who has been working, as the ambassador mentioned, in the forefront on this subject. So allow me to say a few words about him. Deacon Yosef Romano Tafari is chairman of the Ethiopian American Civic Council. He is also a successful business owner for over 40 years in Colorado. The Ethiopian American Civic Council, or known as also EACC, is the largest and oldest civic organization that advocates for human rights and justice in Ethiopia, with 750,000 subscribers. It was the first civic organization to hire lobbyists and PR firms to fight the TPLF. Deacon Yosef is a widely regarded expert on Ethiopia and Horn of Africa geopolitics. One of his notable achievements was he co-authored the Human Rights Bill HR 128 and provided congressional testimony. HR 128 passed the United States House of Representatives with a unanimous vote. The bill supported civil and religious liberties in Ethiopia and condemned the TPLF. He not only has compassion and love for Ethiopia, but also loves and mentors the diaspora community as an ordained minister and spiritual leader at St. Mariam Ethiopian Orthodox Church. He's a proud father of 3 grown children and lives in Colorado with his beloved wife of 39 years. Please welcome Deacon Yosef. Over to you, Deacon Yosef.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I want to also thank the panelists, especially Her Excellency Ambassador Hirut. Thank you for giving us truly the fundamental points why we have to come together as people, as one unit to defend Ethiopia in this consequential time. I want to address in particular what are the outcome or subjected sanction elements that are being proposed in these 2 resolutions. To do that, allow me to go back maybe to make some reference of the genesis of this truly draconian measures back to late October, November, what was happening. It just happened that, if you recall, sanction measures, of course, varies in so many ways. And I think President Biden said it right initially, and he said back in September that his idea about putting a sanction on regarding to Ethiopia is going to be focused surgically to the leaders of the country. And so he was listed Eritrean and Ethiopian government officials. He's put forth an executive order to put sanction on them. Well, the trouble about that, and by the way, when he said that, I think the most important point he made is that he wants to do this in order to avoid making any kind of sanction measure against Ethiopia that will affect the ordinary people. And that is an important point for us to, all of us to remember. But essentially, that executive order that went to the State Department and the Treasury Department in seeking to enforce the executive order, essentially came back empty-handed. They couldn't find any assets held by government officials and overseas. And essentially, they basically said they couldn't find any significant financial assets to bear the executive order. So now by the way, this executive order was issued on September 17. Come around October, November, they knew they had to do something else. And that means the first measure they have considered was to eliminate Ethiopia from the privilege of AGOA. And that came about, the thoughts start to come in about November. About that time, we were making a point of trying to persuade some of these policymakers that this was contradictory to what the president stated, and that as we make our plea, and in one of those important meetings that we had with some of the policymakers, it just happens that there was an assessment that apparently the U.S. intelligence groups have made about the situation in the northern part of Ethiopia, especially where the TPLF was conducting offensive military campaign against Amhara and Afar regions. In that, without us asking them, because we went there to meet with them to talk about why AGOA should not be taken away from Ethiopia, they basically voluntarily kind of expressed, first of all, they said, we're not taking sides. And that's, I guess, is a standard way of saying, basically, they siding with the TPLF. Okay, and then the next from that is what they said, is that we believe that the cessation of hostility between the Ethiopian government and TPLF is very unlikely. And then they said, we believe that the Ethiopian government will prevail. Okay. Just as we are finding this of what their opinion is based on their own intelligence report, a gentleman by the name Senator Bam Mendez for the first time penned the Senate Resolution S3199. That was November 4. This is a very important timeline that we need to keep, because they get the same intelligence report just like the State Department and everything else. They knew the outcome. Now, officially, they were saying people need to evacuate Ethiopia, diplomats need to leave the country, the capital is about to fall, and so on. But internally, this is what they really are, in fact, believe what was going to happen. So they have to have another plan that, in effect, will make TPLF survive politically, and they want to make sure that in the political discourse of Ethiopia, that TPLF remains relevant. So if in fact the military campaign TPLF launched wasn't going to be successful, there has to be another backup plan. So these resolutions are born out of this, nothing more. And it's all about their own interest and how they calculate and arrive to the fact that TPLF, in fact, is going to be the ones that they're going to rely to enforce their interest. Having said that, then after the fact that the counter-offensive measure has really pushed back TPLF back to their own region, and that the current status quo was once established, what they wanted to do is they did not want these resolutions to pass only in one chamber of Congress. Because if that happens, it becomes a simple resolution. And a simple resolution, by its own definition, is non-binding. They cannot force the administration to take it up and then really make sure that what they want out of those resolutions actually come into play in terms of policy matters and everything else. So what they did is they took it down to the lower chamber, the House, and Representative Gregory Meeks, who also chairs the Foreign Affairs Committee, championed the cause. And now it got a new name called HR6600. But this whole thing, its genesis, starts from the Senate. The whole purpose of this is by having these two resolutions advance in both chambers, that when they converge, they become a joint resolution that technically will be binding. That means it has very little to do with the administration prerogative, what to do with this resolution. It needs, obviously, they may send it to the president's desk for signature. So what is in this resolution? And to recap, just in a very, and why we're opposing it. First and foremost, that the demands contained in this resolutions, and both resolutions, by the way, is about 90% the same, because born out of this, you know, from one author anyway. So what you've got is the situation in Ethiopia is an ongoing, quite acutely developing situation. And as such, the demands that are put onto this back in November do not take into account the reality on the ground in Ethiopia. Here are the things that we make sure that the provision contained in this resolution are invalid, that it does not put into account that has taken place to satisfy the demand in this document. It asks for the Ethiopian government not to have an offensive military operation against Tigray. Offensive, the word is offensive. We all know that the Ethiopian Defense Forces, along with the special forces, did not incur into the Tigrayan region, and have, in fact, till this day, are in a defensive posture. It doesn't take into that account, and that's one thing that they demand. They also demand that the emergency decree to be lifted. That has taken place. They also demand that a national reconciliation and dialogue to bring all opposing parties to come to the table. It demands that. Well, Ethiopia, for the first time in its history, thanks to the parliament that ratified a new law to launch this independent commission to do that. Ethiopia freed many political leaders, including members of TPLF. Doesn't take that into account. On access for humanitarian aid, the truth that was mentioned by Her Excellency Ambassador took place just a few days ago, maybe last week. It doesn't take that into account. we can go down the list. There's further point that we're making. So what we're saying is, if this is in fact a constructively engaging resolution, it needs to take into account of what exactly is happening here. And by the way, all of these measures that the government has taken, it has not done so for the pleasure of the United States. That the government looked at this and made these decisions for essentially in the interest of Ethiopia, and that is all. But yet, the demands in these resolution yet still ask for these things to take place as if it never even occurred. Because of that, we're demanding that the Speaker of the House and also Leader Chuck Schumer in the Senate not to allow these resolution to advance to the floor for consideration. Now, the sanction measures, and I know I can get to be sometimes very long-winded, and I apologize about that, but I'm asked to discuss the sanction and what it is all about, and therefore, essentially, what ties all of this, the demands and the potential sanctions that they are proposing, what ties it is the fact that they demand an independent investigators to enter Ethiopia and have a full unfettered access to do their own investigation. This is in the fact that the United Nations Human Rights Council has issued a report, so is the Ethiopian Human Rights Council reports. It doesn't take that into account. On any allegation of human rights violation in this resolution, it only talks about a 7-month period when the Ethiopian forces actually were operating inside Tigray. So it doesn't say anything about what TPLF has committed as documented on Amnesty International. But the biggest problem on these documents, the linchpin, is that so-called independent investigator. Now, who's going to select these independent investigators? Well, it turned out they were able to maneuver the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. As you heard yesterday, it was on the New York headquarters. They have elected 3 members countries to be in the team as investigator, independent investigator, and that is United States, Kenya, and Gambia. We know about United States, but who are the 2 other ones? In fact, it is individuals that have known to carry the water for the United States. So this is actually Team USA now demanding to have a full unfettered access in Ethiopia. And Ethiopia this morning has said no. And I think that's a reasonable answer. If this does not comply, meaning if Ethiopia does not comply to it, therefore the sanction measures, they are basically threatening us, is to literally cut Ethiopia's from the international financial grid for a long period of time. And it would have a severe consequence, like our brothers and sisters who have faced similar measure in Zimbabwe. And unfortunately, sanction measures never achieve what they intend to do. As you and I speak today, there are over 40 countries that are facing sanctions. Some may not be as severe as planned on HR6600, but many are. But guess what? None of those governments in those countries has either complied to the demand of the United States, nor have they collapsed. But the people, like the ambassador said, are the one who's going to be paying the heaviest burden. And last, I want to point out that if this sanction regime is to be applied, God forbids, from both chambers that this goes and it gets its day and becomes a joint resolution, The president can veto it, but let's assume that he even signed it and it becomes law. I think every Ethiopian needs to understand it may not affect all the regions of Ethiopia the same way. Why? Because there are 3 regions, Tigray, Amhara, and Afar, that have gone through the most heart-wrenching devastation because of this war. And the current estimate that could vary, it goes from 5 to 7 years to do the post-war reconstruction, to rebuild these devastation back to where it was. Under this sanction, it may take more than a generation to achieve it. And that's why, and particularly Ethiopians who are from these particular regions need to be extremely conscious about how they go about advocating to support or not support this issue, because this thing is not going to uniformly impact everyone the same way. But in any event, it's easy to put sanction, but it is the hardest thing to lift it. That's why 90% of the sanction that the United States has put has still remain in effect. That's why we have to fight this tooth and nail. And maybe in a different Zoom session, we can discuss some of the things that we're doing. There are some promising things, but there are several challenges. And I would like to say that in my core belief, that we will win this battle. We have to win this battle, because if this measure comes to reality, we may not even recognize a country that this resolution will leave behind. So I want to thank you. Sorry that I took more time than I was allocated. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Deacon Yosef. Really, there's a lot to take in. I'm sure there's a lot of questions, but also it reminds us there's a lot to do. For those of you who want to put your questions in the chat room, please put your name and to who your question is, to whom your questions are directed, and also your questions. Our next speaker is His Excellency Denise Kohde. He is a Pan-Africanist, a seasoned journalist and civil society leader in Kenya. He has worked for both local and international media, especially Japanese media in Kenya and in Africa, as a correspondent and also as a commentator on both topical and political issues. He has been the executive editor of regional publications like Liberal Tribune Weekly, etc. Mr. Kohde has also been involved in the activities of various professional media associations and organizations in Kenya and in parts of Africa. He's a Kenyan by nationality and birth. He's a holder of Bachelor of Arts degree in Communication and Journalism and a Master holder in International Relations. He holds higher diplomas in liberalism and liberal democracy from the International Academy for Leadership Training in Germany. Mr. Kohde is now undertaking an executive master's course in leadership development with Swiss UMEF University. Mr. Denise Kohde is a philanthropist and the founder, chairman of Japanese-sponsored charitable undertaking in Kenya, known as Saidia Furaha Children's Home, supporting orphans and other less fortunate children in society. Currently, Mr. Kohde is the presiding officer of the African Union Economic, Social and Cultural Council, known as AU-ECOSOCC, which is a leading organ of the African Union, and Director General of the Institute for Development and Leadership in Africa, or as we know it in its abbreviation, IDEA for Africa, which represents Kenya in the General Assembly of the African Union in the AU-ECOSOCC. He is also working as an advisor and consultant for various companies and corporates seeking business opportunities in Kenya and in Africa. Mr. Kohde is married and with 3 children. Over to you, Excellency.
Thank you very much, Mahlet. And please forgive me, I'm having a sore throat. I just traveled and came back, so it affects me a little bit. But I thought this is very important to be in this forum. Your Excellencies, my colleagues who are present, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is good evening in Kenya. Good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you are. Your Excellency, it's really an opportunity for me to participate in this forum. But kindly allow me to introduce my position and ECOSOCC. My full name is Denise Kohde, and the presiding officer of African Union ECOSOCC. The ECOSOCC is Economic, Social, and Cultural Council of the Union, which is a technical organ providing advice or opinion to the leadership of the African Union, and also popularizing various activities that the leadership of the Union is coming up with. Our work is to coordinate the participation of non-state actors, which include the civil society organizations, CSOs, interfaith organizations, professional organizations, into participating and providing their inputs to the development of our great continent. And I agree with you when you say that CSOs, we are the voice of the voiceless. And I think it is very important always to engage the civil society in all aspects of our lives. And I'm glad to report that at the continental level, the various organs that are undertaking various development policies and issues is including the civil society in their role. We have a General Assembly under ECOSOCC, which brings together two organizations from each member state. But that is not only limited to that constituency, because we represent the fraternity of the civil society in the continent, and therefore we have a very important role to play in engaging. And Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we played a very important role when COVID broke out in terms of sensitizing through the partnership with the African Development Bank. And the idea is to sensitize the people, the citizens, on how to live with COVID, what is COVID, and also to encourage them to get vaccinations. And I'm happy to report that it was very successful, and we got a very positive response in terms of encouraging people to do so. Now, what I'm emphasizing is the role of the civil society. And therefore, our role is very important, and also in the conflict in our neighbor, in our friends who are in Ethiopia, has been a very big concern for us as civil society organizations. And what I'm saying is that sometimes we really need to think at this in a very deep way. What affects Ethiopia affects Kenya. What affects other neighboring countries affects those other countries. And I think we should look at this in a very critical way. As a journalist, and also in my capacity as the continental, as the presiding officer, I was in Addis Ababa when everybody was being asked to leave. And the question I was asking myself, why? Because for me, it looked very peaceful. There was no sign of anything. But when you look at what is coming out from the international media, it's like Ethiopia was burning. And colleagues who are calling me to leave Addis Ababa as soon as possible, I was telling them there is nothing. I mean, the streets are walking. People are doing their business as usual, and there's nothing that makes me think that there's a problem in Addis Ababa. So I agree with what Your Excellency said, that the international media, to some extent, really exaggerate the situation that we have. But as a journalist, I want to say this. We also need to give real positive information about what we are doing ourselves, so that they don't misunderstand and misinterpret, because they have their own interests, and therefore they're always looking for opportunity to ensure that the information that comes from Africa is negative. And this is something that we really need to think about very seriously. Now, Your Excellencies, talking about the topic of our discussion, which is sanctions. And I fully agree with your opening remarks that sanctions are very devastating. And it is not the political leadership who suffers. It is the innocent citizens of a country. It is the people who pay taxes. It is the people who cannot get employment. It is the people who are suffering economically and having a lot of effects in terms of movement, interaction, and things like that. So when we're talking about sanctions, and whoever is thinking of bringing sanctions, I think you really think twice from the previous speaker as well. What is the target of these sanctions? Is it really to help solve the solution, or is it targeting a particular group of people? And if it does, where does it put the citizens? How is the citizen disconnected with this? I know Sudan had a very serious problem with sanctions. Zimbabwe has been having a lot of serious issues with sanctions. And now, if the international community thinks that sanction is helping, I want to agree with Your Excellency that actually it is worsening this situation. Now, moving to my second point, why sanctions? Whether by the international community or whether by the international, the continental, or whether it is at the regional level. And I raised this recently when I was in Ghana last week, when we were talking about unconstitutional change of governments in Africa. And my question to the audience, was a high level organized by the African Union, was that is sanction the only thing that we're looking at when we're talking about issues or conflicts affecting a country? I think there's a lot from our point of view that needs to be looked at, rather than just looking at sanctions. Because for me, as I've said, sanctions has very serious devastating effects on the citizens, on the society, and not on the leadership. And therefore, for me, sanction is not a solution to a conflict. We need to go beyond that. We need to look at various issues, how people can embrace dialogue, how we can talk to each other. I remember when we had an issue here in Kenya between the political leadership, that was in 2019. A simple handshake brought peace to date. And it's something that is perplexing, and even for us Kenyans, because when two leaders come and sit down and shake hands and agree on what to do, the country becomes peaceful. So the country is not about the leadership. The country is about the citizens of that particular country. So when we are talking about sanctions, I think it's very important to look at it in a negative, in a way that it is punishing. It is not helping to find a solution. And a solution to our conflicts, for me, and from the perspective of the civil society, is through dialogue, is through sitting down and reasoning with each other. Also, in the meeting that we had in Ghana, it came out to us very clearly that it is important for us to sit and talk at our issues as Africa. We cannot depend on the international community to tell us what to do. We are not children. Our country is got independence 60 or 50 years, back, and now we are able to fix our own problems. It is very important for African leaders, for we African people, to find solutions to our problem. We can, without looking at, the US or looking at the European countries or looking at different countries. I would be very happy if a fellow African country imposes a sanction on a neighbor because of certain issues that should not be done. But not when it is coming from an international, an oppressive kind of initiative to put certain demands that must be put in place. Therefore, sanctions to me is not really the solution to the conflicts that we have. Number two, it's very important to understand the nature of that conflict. The conflict in our neighboring country, Ethiopia, is a complex issue that a sanction is not what will help or alleviate that issue. And when you're putting sanctions, it looks like to me that you are targeting the government, but then you are not reaching out to the other partner, which is creating the conflict. So it is not a solution in terms of looking at where we need to go. One, as civil society, we are very much concerned on the human rights violation and abuse. But I think it's very important to understand the context from which this is happening. Then you understand what is the role of the civil society, what is the role of the media, and we as the political, how can this be addressed? It needs to move to the next level. We are now talking about the Agenda 2063, which has beautiful aspirations. So conflicts, killing each other, fighting is not a solution, is not going to take the continent anywhere. And therefore, the most important thing is to focus where do we want to move 50 years after we got independence, or 60 years. And then what is the next level? What are the issues that will be important for the benefit of our people? And therefore, this brings in the aspect of systems, good governance practices, respect to human rights violations, and bringing people to reason together and to dialogue in terms of conflicts. Challenges will always be there in any democracy, in any developing nation. These are challenges that we go with. I look at the situation now between Russia and Ukraine, and people are dying. But what we hear is that we are going to put sanctions. When are you going to put sanctions when people have lost their lives? What is this sanction going to help? I think it's very important to put in a mechanism to bring in a mediation as soon as possible, so that people stop killing each other, we stop losing life. But this aspect of the international community waiting to impose sanctions when situations are polarized is not helping anybody. Now, my points here are two. Is sanction the solution to our conflicts? Number two, must these sanctions be pressure to us? Must they come from people who feel that we have to behave in a certain way? Otherwise, they don't do this and that. And number three, are they really targeting the conflict, or they are just punishing the ordinary citizens. The other point that I also wanted to look at is as African citizens, probably I will repeat myself on this. For me, the way forward is dialogue and engaging and talking to our issues, and looking sideways, and also being good neighbors to our country, to our neighbors. It means that when there's a conflict in Kenya, it's similarly like there's a conflict in Ethiopia. When there's a conflict in Ethiopia, it's the same as what is happening in Eritrea. So when we take our issues like that as Africans, then it becomes very easy for us to find solutions to the problems that are affecting us. And the focus should be more on taking this continent forward, rather than bringing us ourselves back. Ethiopia is a country that we're proud of, and as Mahlet has said, one of my role is to advise those who are seeking investment. And everybody's now, the international business community is looking at Ethiopia because of the hard work, because of the commitment, and because of the stability that is there. So any interruption in terms of destroying that, and also in terms of transport. For a long time, Kenya was the hub of communication in East Africa. But I think Ethiopia has overtaken us. And this is because when you're in Ethiopia, everything is regulated, the connecting time, the flights are on time, and everybody feels comfortable connecting through Addis Ababa. So anything that can bring that gain down and can project Ethiopia in a negative way is not only hurting the Ethiopia as a country, but also hurting the entire region. And therefore, my appeal is that the African leadership should take responsibility, should try to look into aspects of bringing peace or creating solutions when there are conflicts. We cannot be looking forward we cannot be looking outside Africa to find solutions for our problems. It's important for our leadership at a continental level to look at issues that are affecting us and how to deal with them. And Your Excellencies and the audience who are attending, I'm happy to report this, that what I'm observing from the African Union is that they're beginning to be very bold on questioning certain issues that are affecting within the member states. And to me, this is a good sign. This is a good way forward. That although it's a continental body, but the leadership will not shy away from pointing out certain issues which are affecting peace or affecting stability in the member states. So this is a good sign. And for me, I would really encourage that let us solve our problems as Africans. Let us put sanctions to ourselves because of this and this, but not look forward to some people with different interests to come and tell us what we need to do. Because of my thought, I will not speak so much, but I thought that this is something that we need to share. And then we see how we can bring in the role of the civil society, how we can bring in the international relations in terms of within the African continent and to solve our own problems. I believe that conflicts cannot be solved through sanctions. Conflicts are not what we should be focusing now in Africa. We have Agenda 2063 with beautiful aspirations. This is where the continent needs to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Excellency, really, because one of the aim of this webinar is indeed, amongst other things that I have said initially before we start this, is also to bring that Pan-African voices or African voices in fighting, our problems globally that we face as an African people. Of course, that's not to say that it's not only African people or Black people that are facing sanctions, but we do, as you said, we need African solutions to African problems. So we do appreciate that tonight you are here with us and you gave us your view or the institutions African Union view on this. Our next speaker is His Excellency Ambassador David Comissiong. Allow me to introduce him. David Comissiong was born in the Caribbean island of St. Vincent, the son of a traveling Methodist minister of religion. David received his primary education at Tranquility Primary School in Trinidad before attending Harrison College and the University of the West Indies in Barbados. He won a Barbados exhibition in 1979 and the Sir Fred Phillips Academic Prize at the Faculty of Law, University of the West Indies in 1981 and has been a practicing attorney at law since 1984. David Comissiong is a former senator in the government of Barbados and is currently Barbados ambassador to the Caribbean community known as CARICOM and to the Association of Caribbean states. He is also a founder member of the Caribbean Pan-African Network, the Clement Payon Movement of Barbados, the Caribbean chapter of the International Network in Defense of Humanity, and the Global African Congress, and was an architect and the first director of the Barbados Government's Commission for Pan-African Affairs. He represented the Caribbean region at the seventh Pan-African Congress in Uganda, played a key role in the United Nations World Conference Against Racism in South Africa, and has represented the diaspora on the African Union's Economic, Social, and Cultural Council, ECOSOCC. Since the year 2012, Mr. Comissiong has served as a member of Barbados National Task Force on Reparations. He is also the author of The Wide Streets of Tomorrow, Essays and Speeches, and then it is The Healing of the Nation, The Case of Reparation, and the third one, The Pan-African Love Story of Arnold and Mignon Ford. Ambassador David Comissiong, over to you.
Thank you, Sister Mahlet, for that very comprehensive introduction. It's a pleasure to be here to participate in this discussion. Let me begin by giving the audience a little insight into CARICOM, the Caribbean community. We are a grouping of 15 nations in the Caribbean, and most of the nations being in the Eastern and Southern Caribbean. And as a grouping, we have a relationship with Cuba, which is a Northern Caribbean nation, some 90 miles away from the United States of America. Many persons would know that Cuba has been under embargo, sanctions from the United States of America ever since the year 1960. In fact, October of this year will be 62 years of the US embargo against Cuba. And when we say US embargo, we are talking about a regime of unilateral sanctions, otherwise known as unilateral coercive measures. And why is Cuba subjected to such sanctions? Well, from way back in the 19th century, the United States, or important elements within the United States, wanted to appropriate Cuba, wanted to either colonize Cuba or to make Cuba a part of the American territory. So much so that when Cuba fought for its independence from Spain, from the Spanish Empire, in the late 19th century, the United States entered the conflict in 1898, assisted in the defeat of the Spanish Empire, and then proceeded to impose a protectorate, a virtual protectorate over independent Cuba. So Cuba, having gained its independence from Spain, became a virtual colony or protectorate of the United States until 1959, 1st of January 1959, when Fidel Castro and his fellow revolutionaries completed the successful Cuban Revolution against an American puppet government. And revolutionary Cuba began as a nation on the 1st of January 1959. Well, as the new revolutionary government of Cuba insisted on an independent policy in relation to the United States, President Eisenhower commenced the imposition of sanctions against Cuba in October of 1960. Ever since then, the sanctions have been continually deepened. 1960, the US prohibited exports to Cuba. By 1961, they ended diplomatic relations with Cuba. By 1962, They put an embargo upon all trade between the US and Cuba. By 1963, they prohibited travel to Cuba. They also outlawed financial transactions with Cuba and prohibited the purchase or importation of any merchandise of Cuban origin. By 1982, they unconscionably placed Cuba on a list of countries that sponsor state terrorism. And by 1992, they prohibited even foreign-based subsidiaries of US companies from trading with Cuba. They put restrictions on remittances to Cuba, and they authorized sanctions against even foreign companies that invested in property that Cuba had, American property that Cuba had nationalized way back in the early 1960s. Now, the countries of CARICOM, most of us were former colonies of Britain. We began to gain our independence in the 1960s, the mid-1960s. And by 1972, we had 4 independent CARICOM countries, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, Guyana, and Barbados. And by 1972, the United States had orchestrated almost the total isolation of Cuba within our hemisphere. Cuba had been thrown out of the Organization of American States, and the United States of America insisted that virtually all of the countries of the hemisphere should isolate Cuba. Well, the 4 relatively small Caribbean community nations determined that we were going to defy the United States of America, and we were going to extend diplomatic, economic, and political recognition to Cuba. And we did so on the 8th of December of 1972. And ever since 1972, the countries of CARICOM have given solidarity to Cuba and have had a campaign to combat the American embargo against Cuba. And the first point I want to make about unilateral economic sanctions is that first of all, unilateral economic sanctions are an act of economic warfare. Secondly, unilateral economic sanctions are contrary to international law. So they are unlawful unless they are being used in response to an attack on the country imposing the sanctions. In other words, a country under international law, a country is only entitled to impose unilateral coercive measures, that is, to engage in an act of economic warfare if it is acting in self-defense, if the country on which it is imposing the sanctions has attacked it. And we can go to the United Nations Charter to get a good understanding of this. If we go to Article 2 of the UN Charter, it tells us that the organization is based on the principle of the sovereign equality of all of its member states. All member states are equal. Let me emphasize this. And so I do not understand this concept of the United States being the international community. I wish someone would explain that to me. Why isn't Africa the international community? We must not accept any notion that a handful of Western nations constitute the international community. So let's disabuse our minds of that. The UN Charter makes it very clear that it is issues, first of all, it makes it clear that where countries have any dispute, that those disputes are to be addressed through negotiation, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, judicial settlement. In other words, there is to be peaceful settlement of disputes. The Charter also goes on to make it clear that where there are matters that require some form of imposition of force, that those matters are reserved to the United Nations Security Council. So for example, Article 41 of the Charter tells us that the Security Council may decide what measures not involving the use of armed force are to be employed to give effect to its decisions. That is, its decisions pertaining to disputes, international disputes, or international breaches of the peace. And it may call upon the members of the United Nations to apply such measures. These may include complete or partial interruption of economic relations, in other words, economic sanctions, and of rail, sea, air, postal, telegraphic, radio, and other means of communications. So it is absolutely clear that if sanctions are to be imposed, they are to be imposed not unilaterally, they are to be imposed through a decision of the UN Security Council. Article 51 of the UN Charter tells us that nothing in the present Charter shall impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations. So in other words, yes, if you have been attacked, you could respond with sanctions. You could respond with unilateral sanctions. But outside of that, it is really, sanctions are really the province of the UN Security Council. So we would have to ask the question, has Cuba attacked the United States of America, thereby justifying the United States of America imposing unilateral sanctions on Cuba? The answer is no. Has Ethiopia attacked the United States of America, thereby justifying the United States of America imposing sanctions on Ethiopia? Once again, the answer is no. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have to be very clear about this. We have to insist that the imposition of unilateral sanctions are the province of the United Nations Security Council. If the matter of Ethiopia goes before the UN Security Council, and the UN Security Council, all 15 members, in its wisdom, determines that sanctions should be imposed on Ethiopia, then so be it. That would be in keeping with the UN Charter and with the principles of international law. However, if that is not the case, it is not lawful for any country, the United States of America or any other country that Ethiopia has not attacked, to simply impose unilateral sanctions on Ethiopia or on Cuba for that matter. Now, ever since the year 1992, Cuba has taken an annual resolution to the United Nations General Assembly denouncing the US embargo, the US sanctions against Cuba as being unlawful and demanding their removal. And every year since 1992, that resolution has been passed by the members of the United Nations General Assembly. In fact, over the years, there's been growing support for that resolution, so much so that now, typically when it comes up for the vote, the only countries that vote against it tend to be the United States, Israel, and maybe at most one or two other very close US allies. But the General Assembly has said consistently since 1992 that those unilateral sanctions are unlawful and have directed the United States to terminate them. Of course, the United States has not bowed to the collective will of the UN General Assembly. They have ignored the collective will of the real international community. If you want to find the international community, you find it in the UN General Assembly. United States has ignored that. But the point is, the Caribbean community, the 15 states of the Caribbean community, we see Cuba as part of our Caribbean civilization, and therefore we defend Cuba, and we have unanimity in opposing the US sanctions against Cuba, a member of our Caribbean civilization. The African Union has to think about this matter of Ethiopia in a similar way. Ethiopia is a founding member of the Organization of African Union. It is a founding member of the African Union. Addis Ababa is the headquarters of the African Union. One would expect and imagine that if there is a breach of international law in relation to a member, such an important member of the African Union, that there would be African solidarity and unanimity in dealing with this matter, in opposing the unlawful imposition of sanctions on Ethiopia. The other point to be made is this: sanctions are not about solving any conflict. A country does not impose unilateral sanctions in order to solve a conflict. A country typically imposes unilateral sanctions in order to effect regime change, to bring down a government, or to make a government, a regime, bend to the will of the country that is imposing the sanctions. Sanctions are not about solving any domestic dispute or conflict. So I won't go on much longer. I would just like to say that there's clearly a Cold War dimension to the situation with Ethiopia. There are big countries, big powers in this world who seem to believe that they must dominate, that there's no room for big power coexistence. So in other words, either the world must be dominated by the United States or by China or by Russia, and that there's no room for peaceful coexistence. Well, we the African and Caribbean and non-aligned countries, we must disavow that. We must say that there's no place in this world for any Cold War. We will not accommodate ourselves to any Cold War notion that either you're in the US camp or you're in the Chinese camp or you're in the Russian camp or the NATO camp. That is the way towards instability and destruction in our world. We must therefore stand for true non-alignment, and we must insist no more Cold Wars. There's room for all of us in this world, and we must coexist peacefully in this world. We must adhere to the principles of international law. We must adhere to the principles of the United Nations Charter, and we must build a genuine multilateral system. My final point is that if we are to resist these big powers, we we cannot do it if we are divided. We have to be unified. Just as CARICOM tries to be unified on the issue of Cuba, the African Union needs to be unified on the issue of Ethiopia. But in addition, we must try to build African, Caribbean, and even wider third world unity. Last year, September, we had a very historic first Africa CARICOM summit, where heads of government of Africa and the Caribbean came together. And we made a decision at that summit to establish a permanent forum of African and Caribbean territories and states. We need to follow through on that decision. We need to consolidate that permanent forum, because that permanent forum could then become a location in which the governments and the statesmen of Africa and the Caribbean come together to discuss difficult political issues, like the situation in Ethiopia, for example, like the issue, the situation, like this matter of the imposition or the threatened imposition of sanctions against Ethiopia, like in the Caribbean, the situation of Haiti. We have a very difficult crisis situation to deal with. That permanent forum would allow us to come together, to be able to share ideas, to discuss these problems, and then to have solidarity, to support each other in helping to deal with these very difficult political matters. So that is my hope, that we will establish that permanent forum between the African Union and CARICOM, between Africa and the Caribbean, and that we will, as you know, as a collective body, be much stronger and much more united in dealing with these kinds of very difficult issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador David, for that. Really, yes, if we want to go further or stand stronger for Africans to unite, is the only way. Not only for Africans, also, as you say, for all the south part of the world, and also for the third world, as it's called. So it's a controversial name. Yes, so our next speaker is Brother Dr. Biniam Misgun. He's Dr. Biniam Misgun. He's from Eritrea, currently based in South Africa. He is a lecturer at School of Social Science, University of KwaZulu-Natal. His area of expertise is economic history and development studies. Brother Biniam, over to you.
Thank you, Mahlet. I had a very exciting moment listening to esteemed colleagues and ambassadors. Really appreciated that. What I wanted to speak about for today is the socio-economic and human cost of sanction, drawing a bit of experience from Eritrea. First, a brief background on the sanction that has been imposed on Eritrea, just so you know how it came about and what it did to Eritrea and how Eritrea tried to combat it as well as mitigate against its consequences. It came at the back of souring relationship between the US and Eritrea and the mid 2000s, and Eritrea's independent policies were not going down very well with the US, and so the US State Department were issuing a lot of combative statements warning Eritrea, and eventually they rallied around African states and brought about the UN Security Council resolution in December 2009. And of course, African states that participated in it were apparently untwisted by the US, but the US was the owner of this particular resolution. And then, of course, it was also again empowered in 2011 once again to strengthen it, apparently. And this was in relation to Eritrea's involvement, apparent Eritrea's involvement in Somalia's conflict. We all know now this was just a cooked story. Even the Somalia-Eritrea Monitoring Group, year after year, came out with a report indicating that there's no evidence to suggest that Eritrea is supporting Al-Shabaab. Despite this fact, this sanction had continued. Now, those sanctions supposedly were trying to twist Eritrea into behaving, as they call it. Yeah, this spoiler must be put into its place. That's how this sanction was framed and phrased. And of course, it was supposedly military and doesn't have much economic impact to it. However, we all know those sanctions are very broad and interpreted differently by those who participate in it. Yeah? So this has been there for close to 9 years, and it was formally lifted in 2018. Once again, when Ethiopia and Eritrea forged that peace agreement, and Ethiopia wrote that later to the UN Security Council. It's on the back of that the sanction was lifted formally, yet they continue to exist in different ways and in different interpretations. And of course, they call it a technicality, has not been addressed to get the sanction completely lifted off the back of Eritrea. Now, what are the consequences of those sanctions? You can look at them in different ways, but I would like you to think about the economic aspect to it, the social political aspect to it is very important. The economic aspect, obviously, investors are often wary of sanctioned states. They wouldn't want to come to those states, yeah? So that's one way of impacting it. So, you know, create a general narrative about it that would push away potential investors. And in addition to that, there's high cost to working with sanctioned states. So Eritrea, you know, had been trying to attract investors in the mining and culture sector. They are, you know, staying away from the country simply not because Eritrea doesn't offer a decent investment opportunity, but rather because there's a huge cost attached to it. Through going formal process of the bureaucratic process, you know, being able to import in the necessary supplies that are considered to be having a dual purpose. All that is impacting negatively on the business environment, and that's also high cost for anybody wanting to invest in the country. And already existing businesses are also being impacted negatively by it. Yeah? You can't get loans from outside. Importing goods are becoming very much problematic because they have to go through this multiple regulation, multiple checks, and the cost becomes a lot higher. Yeah? And the companies generally tend to avoid doing business with the country, or businesses in the country for that matter, few risking their relation with the major partners and the major powers. Yeah, if you look at most mining companies that were operating in Eritrea started being Western-owned companies, but later on they handed over to the Chinese because the cost of doing business in Eritrea started to become costly to them, politically costly, not financially, not rewarding, but politically costly. So they started passing it over to Chinese companies who didn't have much problem with that kind of arrangement. Yeah. And compounded, it has caused a massive economic strain. And of course, the economic strain would eventually be felt by ordinary citizens, and opportunities that would be created for them has been hard to come by, and that much difficult for the state to put in place. And obviously, it has also a debilitating effect on states' ability to provide services. And particularly if you consider those products that were supposed to be imported in order to provide agricultural extension, energy, and other services and necessary infrastructures had been severely impacted. Yeah? Telecommunication, because they tend to have a dual purpose, yeah, civil and military, and that was the excuse given to deny Eritrea or make it harder for Eritrea to be able to import those goods. And it goes into a pharmaceutical company that operates in Eritrea that were trying to get input for the company. It has been very difficult as well. So those things have a compounding effect, and eventually the ordinary citizens tend to feel it. Weaker service delivery, drugs not being available efficiently, their living standard not being lifted up, general misery, and this is the human cost. And eventually they tend to look outside of the country, for better opportunities, and that has been the case whether it's in Eritrea, Cuba, or Zimbabwe. People tend to feel the need to go elsewhere in order to meet their aspirations, and of course the state won't be able to provide the necessary opportunities for those individuals to meet their aspirations. So it's very important, to understand those things. And then of course the other element is sanctions obviously create entrenched positions. They're not going to address any problem, but they create entrenched positions. And that also, the political atmosphere becomes a little bit difficult one, tensions, and of course the sanctions were meant effectively to crush the state in order to bring about regime change, as it's been indicated by Ambassador David, and everybody knows that. And of course, those businesses do not want to come to those places, or those who are willing to work are afraid of working with those states because they know what those sanctions entail and what the purpose of those sanctions are. So it has a compounded effect both on social, economic, as well as political realities on the ground for ordinary citizens. And obviously Eritrea tried to combat this by mobilizing, at one hand, by mobilizing its citizens, both inside and outside, somehow reminding them that this is time to fight back. Of course, a strong diaspora mobilization, the Eritrean government has been able to achieve, which is astounding. And they had been outside the UN headquarters and Geneva on yearly basis for the last 10 years, fighting against those sanctions. And of course, it has also sought to engage its neighbors, and that's very important. Solidarity with the neighbors. Sanctions only work when other parties and other states are participating in it, in the same way that the Western governments were interpreting the UN sanction to mean that Eritrea should not have access to any kind of income, whether it's through remittance or the 2% tax, solidarity tax that Eritreans were contributing. So Canada, Sweden, all the other countries were trying to prevent Eritreans from contributing to the well-being of their countries. And this kind of solidarity is very important in withstanding the sanction itself, but then now they come to prevent Eritreans from contributing to well-being of their country, and that's also something that we need to pay attention to. So when sanction is there, then there are different interpretations that have been taken out of it in order to create a difficult atmosphere for all of us. And the third element that Eritrea has sought to mobilize or be part is, forging solidarity with like-minded states and like-minded groups. And here you have the group friends and the friends of the UN Charter. Most of them have been sanctioned by the United States, a unilateral sanction. And of course, Eritrea has also been unilaterally sanctioned by the US on several occasions, and it's not new for Eritrea. But we have to somehow find a way to fight back those things. And of course, fighting back for them not to happen, but also fight back when they happen, a way to mitigate against them. Mobilizing citizens would be a very important way of addressing that as well. I think I will leave it here. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Biniam, for that. Really, we are here, of course, mainly today also to show or demonstrate that our challenges are shared. And so in order to solve, then we need to have that collective voice. So thank you very much, really, to bring in the experience of Eritrea. Our next speaker is Brother Rutendo from Zimbabwe. Brother Rutendo, you are here with us, right? Brother Rutendo? Rutendo?
Yeah, I think he's trying to unmute himself.
Okay. Tashe, maybe you can help to unmute him.
I don't see him. I don't see him. And he can write us message, please.
Brother Rutendo, if you're there, maybe you can text us. I know he was.
I see someone with RUU with iPhone trying to do something. I thought maybe it's.
Just a second. He's our last speaker. So
yes, hi.
All right,
Can
good. Okay, yes, we do hear you. Yeah.
Can you see me? Can you see me as well?
No, we don't see you.
Yes, we
I can see him.
Now we see you. But allow me to introduce you just quickly, okay? So Rutendo Matinyarare is a renowned Zimbabwean anti-sanction activist who is the chairperson of Zimbabwe anti-sanction movement and founder of Zimbabwean Unite Against US War Sanctions. His anti-sanctions activism is driven by his position as a brand architect, marketing strategist, and CEO of Through the Line Marketing and brand consultancy known as Frontline Start Marketing Consultancy. Rutendo has been in marketing for over 25 years and has developed that knack of telling a good story. He is also a fellow of the Institute of Marketing Management of South African alongside the Chartered Institute of Marketing in UK and Prince 2 project management practitioner who can make unpopular issues mainstream without a budget, as he has done with sanctions. Over the past 3 years, he has been an integral part of Zimbabwe's fight against US, UK, and EU sanctions on the country after convincing the government to depoliticize its fight against this economic war by launching a national, regional, and continental legal and publicity campaign against these crimes against humanity. So not too long after that, in July 2021, for the first time in 20 years, meaning since imposing sanctions on Zimbabwe, the US Congress Committee on Global Human Rights, Health and Organization approached to inform them, his organization, to inform them that they will be undertaking an impact assessment of their sanctions on human rights and health in not only Zimbabwe, but the whole of Africa, with the intention of eliminating the impact of sanctions on civilians. Rutendo's key competencies are knowing how to tell a good story. So Brother Rutendo, welcome again, over to you.
Thank you so much. And I would like to apologize for my lighting. I was invited to come to Harare for a meeting, and that's why I was also late because of the meeting. And I probably will leave a bit earlier than necessary because I have to meet some important people on this very same issue. So what I bring to the table today is I want to talk about how to fight these sanctions by going beyond politicizing the fight against sanctions, where our governments try to negotiate with the sanction sender for the sanctions to be removed, for us to take the fight to the next level. So as an example, I heard the gentleman from Eritrea talking about how Eritrea was put under UN sanctions, and on top of UN sanctions, they were put under US sanctions. And this is what I want to address. Unilateral sanctions that are not UN sanctions are illegal. They are illegal at international law. They are illegal according to a resolution that was made by the UN Human Rights Council that is called Resolution 3413. And that 3413 was actually, came after 2721 resolution of the UN Human Rights Council. All those resolutions say that unilateral sanctions are illegal and they violate human rights. They deny civilians the enjoyment of their human rights, and they also give remedies, particularly in UN Human Rights Council's Resolution 3413. It actually says that countries must mitigate sanctions. Those countries that are put as third parties and asked to impose sanctions as third parties must not impose illegal unilateral sanctions, and banking systems, financial systems, companies, software companies, and NGOs should not implement illegal coercive measures. And so because we've got that law, because we've got the UN Charter, any country that imposes sanctions unilaterally outside the UN is actually breaking international law. And that is why you see that the Iranians, who were found to have proliferated the nuclear treaties, was put under UN sanctions. And when the United States decided to add more sanctions, to put more sanctions over and above what the UN had put, the Iranians went to the International Court of Justice. They sued in the International Court of Justice, and the International Court of Justice discovered that the sanctions being imposed by the United States upon Iran were illegal. They were violating human rights, denying the Iranian people medicine, food, payment clearances that allow the Iranian people to enjoy their basic human rights. And I think it's important for us to just quote some of the basic human rights that human beings are entitled to. And I might not be able to give you an exhaustive group of human rights, but I'll give you the basic ones: social, economic, cultural, political, and legal rights. Then we've got the right to life, the right to economic development, which comes as an economic right, and the right to life, the right to freedom of movement, freedom of expression, political freedoms, and democracy. All these are things that are denied by sanction senders. When they sanction a government, prevent a government from being able to give its people services, they punish municipalities, they deprive municipalities of money, of loans, and multilateral loans, and the ability to get balance of payment assistance to local governments and national governments. What this does is it then prohibits or hinders people from getting good healthcare, water, healthcare, food, education, social services, and the ability to deliver services to the citizens of those countries. And it is incumbent on the citizens of those countries, as the UN Human Rights Council's Resolution 3413 says, to actually fight to mitigate those sanctions, to bust those sanctions, and to go out to third-party countries and governments and ask them not to implement those sanctions. Now, what we have done in Zimbabwe is after 18 years of these sanctions, we began to read about sanctions. We began to read the laws around sanctions. We began to read what it is that the special rapporteur for sanctions was writing. We went further and began to read what the special rapporteur who measures the negative impacts of sanctions was also saying. And then we went to our government and we said to our government, it's time to legalize the fight. It's time to make the fight against the sanctions upon our people a legal fight. Now, in Zimbabwe, they tried to tell us that they were targeted sanctions on politicians who had who had violated human rights, and that those politicians were the people that were targeted. When we began to read the sanctions, we realized that the sanctions did not really target the politicians. The politicians were put in the front, but when you read the fine print of the sanctions themselves, particularly the executive orders actually prohibit people doing business, making clearances for our government and the state and its municipalities, its state enterprises, and any organizations or companies owned by the government. So in as much as they put targets in front of us, at the end of the day, the sanctions are on everybody in Zimbabwe, and anybody that wants to do business in Zimbabwe, wants to clear funds for the Zimbabwean government, Zimbabwean companies, needs to get a permission or a license from the US president. And without that license, those people are liable to be given secondary sanctions, to be arrested, put in prison, have their properties confiscated, not only in the United States, but other jurisdictions that are supposedly partners of the United States, and also prohibited to do business or trade with any other companies or organizations and institutions and banks across the world that want to do business in the United States. Because the United States has got a policy that says that you're either with us or against us. And within that, they will always implement their sanctions through the fine print and through the written document, but they also exert what is called bilateral pressure with other countries and third parties. When they have bilateral agreements, talks, and these nations come together, they ask them to implement sanctions. They talk to insurance companies all across the world and ask particularly reinsurers not to insure transactions from countries upon which the United States has got executive orders. And I would think Eritrea is under those executive orders. Zimbabwe is under those executive orders. There's a time that Burundi was under those executive orders. Congo has got some executive orders on it. And also Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, and a number of other countries. So what we began to do is to dig into this, to understand that, let's say that they were right, that there were some targeted individuals. Are the sanctions on targeted individuals legal? When we began to read closer, we realized that sanctions are punishment. And a lot of times people are punished by these sanctions without ever having an opportunity to be tried in a court of law, a competent tribunal that has the jurisdiction to be hearing the case in the first place, and that they are actually being tried for existing crimes and then being punished accordingly by a code that exists for those crimes with the appropriate punishment, which are the sanctions that they give. And we realize that there is no law that tries people for these human rights violations in individual countries outside the UN, outside the UN Human Rights Council, that has the equipment, the tools, and the multilateralism to actually investigate and come up with conclusions as to whether people have violated human rights. And then they come up with their own punishment. And by the United States and their allies coming up with punishments without trial, they're actually breaking what is called the Universal Bill of Rights. They're punishing people without trial. And that is a violation of human rights. Then after they've done that, they go beyond these so-called targets that they talk about and impose sanctions on an entire government. And what that does, it begins to collectively punish disproportionately and indiscriminately and unreasonably civilians. That in its own respect, whether it's done during war, according to the Geneva Convention, is a war crime. And when it is done in peacetime, it is a crime against humanity. So when sanctions are imposed, even on targeted individuals who usually are your investors, the politicians, and the people with money in a society, those people then become unable to create jobs. They become unable to invest in an economy. They become unable to develop the nation. And thus, it becomes collective punishment of civilians, which then becomes a crime against humanity, while the violation of the rights of those so-called targeted people is a violation of the human rights by a contravention of the Bill of Rights. When we began to understand this, we began to understand that we've now got a case to approach courts And we have a number of options on the courts that we need to attend to. And we began a fight in South Africa where we've launched a case because South Africa is the biggest trading partner of Zimbabwe and is the biggest trading partner of many countries on the African continent. And many transactions, particularly banking transactions, financial transactions, investment transactions, come through this gateway that the Europeans created, which is called South Africa, to then disperse money throughout the continent. And so we decided to start our legal action in South Africa against South African financial institutions that have been implementing these sanctions illegally. Why is it illegal? Because the laws that are being used to punish most African countries are American laws, created either in the American Parliament or a combination of the American Parliament or what we call Congress, together with laws that are being made by executive order by the American president. When the American president asks for those sanctions to be adhered to or to be implemented by foreign nations, what those foreign nations are doing is they're implementing US law in their own territory without the permission of their own parliaments, which is what we call extraterritorial imposition of law, and that is illegal. So we're taking the law of another nation, imposing it on a sovereign nation, yet the UN Charter is clear that all nations are sovereign and no nation is greater than the other. So when that law is taken from America and superimposed in a foreign nation, that is colonialism. That is what it is that the it's actually 1315, or is it 1813, 1815, the decolonization declaration or decolonization treaty does not allow for nations to be forced to implement the laws of foreign nations. Not only that, we then have this foreign imposition of this law in a foreign country, and then international law, which is this resolution that I've been giving you, Human Rights Council Resolution 3413, says it is illegal to impose unilateral sanctions. So when a bank in South Africa or financial institutions in South Africa, organizations in South Africa implement these sanctions on behalf of the United States, they are taking something that is already an illegality and they're enforcing an illegality in South Africa. And in South Africa, they're also going against South African law, which says that everybody must be tried before they are punished. They're also going against South African law, which does not believe in breaking human rights law, which is this collective punishment of civilians. So we are starting in those courts to stop the financial system of South Africa being used to implement sanctions on Zimbabwe. And I would say to any other African country that is also suffering under these sanctions, go and look and see which African institutions, which partner states are implementing these sanctions on your country. And if you find that out, then begin your legal action there. Why? Because for law, international law to be crafted, it needs a contribution of custom that is being made in our courts, or what is called precedents that is made in our African courts pertaining to this international law. So every time an African court finds against these illegal acts upon Africans that violate international universal human rights, that begins to feed into decisions that can be influenced to take them to the International Court of Justice, which is the court of the UN, or we can use them in the International Criminal Court. That then begins to have lower courts making rules, making judgments that begin to have an impact on international law, giving life to a lot of these international treaties and international agreements for the benefit of Africans. So that is Africanizing law, or making the law of the world part and parcel of African law, so that we can begin to be seen as human beings and our humanity asserted by these particular actions that we take in African courts. We will go then to other jurisdictions where we've got big trade partners, Nigeria, Kenya, and other countries, and try and get precedents, and not precedents, but custom made there. And once that happens, we can then take these judgments straight to the International Court of Justice and the African Court. But another reason we're doing it is once we can stop African institutions on the African continent and have these sanctions declared illegal in Africa, it's going to be very difficult for the Americans to use bilateral pressure to pressure third parties in Africa to implement sanctions. It also allows us to confiscate their properties when the courts rule in our favor and give us damages or compensation or reparations, which the resolution that I spoke about, 3413, insists that we must have a special rapporteur come, measure the impact of the sanctions, and then from there, we must claim damages, reparations, or compensation. So this is the advice that I'd like to give to the Ethiopians that are facing a possibility of sanctions, that you need to join us in the cases that we're running right now, so that you can begin to use that as petitions to members of the Congress, as petitions to members of the US government, as petitions to the US president to say, any law that you write now will become voidable in future if Zimbabweans succeed in their cases against you. You also need to start conscientizing the business people in America, the banks that are going to be asked not to clear Ethiopian payments, Eritrean payments. You need to start writing to them now as institutions to say, listen, the laws that you will be breaking if you institute these sanctions are international laws. You'll be committing crimes against humanity. You'll be perpetuating crimes, international crimes. You will be breaking human rights law. And by so doing, you are giving us the right to pursue you in courts for damages and to take your properties in Africa, if indeed we go after you and we win, because we've already warned you, and you should be able to foresee the consequences of you violating the human rights of Africans. And you need to remind them that we are human. You cannot break international law on the pretext that you're punishing animals, because you're punishing human beings. And if you can't do this in Europe, you surely cannot do this in Africa. And if you're running around saying that Russia is breaking international law by attacking Ukraine, then you have to accept that if you impose sanctions that are illegal and implement them against people, against governments, in a manner that deprives Africans of their human rights, including the right to life, including the right to health, then you too are breaking international law, and you're doing it deliberately, and we shall pursue you. You should also then inform those businesses that you, as businesses in America, Canada, Australia, and Europe and American partners, have a right to refuse to implement illegal sanctions. And you have a right not to be deprived of your right to trade in Africa and make money in Africa while China is taking up that position. Russia is taking up that position because you're implementing illegal sanctions because your government forces you to do that. So what you're now doing is you're getting businesses in America, mining companies in America, to join you in your struggle in solidarity to sue their own government for trying to get them to implement illegal sanctions. So we are talking to these companies now to say, for 21 years, you haven't been able to deal with the resources in Zimbabwe. You haven't been able to deal with the uranium. You haven't been able to get platinum. You haven't been able to get chrome. You haven't been able to get strategic mineral resources because your government forced you to implement illegal sanctions. And you've lost billions. So you must sue that government together with us. I think we've lost signal. Hello?
We hear
No,
you.
no, we are hearing you.
Okay.
So wrap up.
So these are the strategies that we want you guys as Africans to start understanding, that we must have solidarity. We must have solidarity as a people, but we must also take our story as a people to the rest of the world to say that our rights are being violated, our humanity is being compromised. And then we must also get solidarity from NGOs, humanitarian organizations, to make them understand crimes against humanity are happening against us through these illegal sanctions. And then eventually, we must get the solidarity of the parliaments and the businesses of those countries. Thank you so much. I won't be able to stay long because I've got some ministers that need to have a meeting with me. So if possible, if there are any people that have got questions, am I able to answer them quickly before I need to go?
Thank you, Brother Rutendo, for that. There are questions which are directed for all, really. Thank you very much for that presentation. Yeah, let me just go to the questions since you said you're leaving. there are questions that are directed to all. Just give me some. One is, can governments of all the countries that suffer under these unfair sanctions get together and fight the sanctions regime at the International Court, or make this an agenda of a meeting at a UN General Assembly meeting? That's from Dr. Azeb. There is also another one, which is a related question, which says, for example, for the second bill to be approved for the HR6600, there are only 19 days, if I'm not mistaken. That's what it says in the question from Sister Jasmine. Can Ethiopia take the sponsor to court, if that is possible at all? You may start with that, Brother Rutendo.
Thank you very much. So first of all, I think, yes, all African governments can come together and start to have a legal class action, or at least to become friends of the court in any jurisdiction where cases are being heard on the issue of sanctions. So if you, for instance, have the issue of Zimbabwe right now, Zimbabwe is isolated, and we, at least as a civil society organization that is taking these sanctions into the South African court, we are isolated because we're going into this court alone. We're going into a court that might be hostile because this country that we're going into a court of is being controlled by the Americans through American debt and American investment and Western investment. So they might use pressure of those investments to pressure the South Africans. So other nations can join us as friends of the court with an interest in this case because it has bearing and public interest for them and their nations. And so that will pressure the judges to make a decision that is legal, but it will also begin to put gravitas upon other African courts and other African countries to look at this issue as a very important issue in Africa when they make their rulings and judgments. Then when we take these decisions and we get it in our favor, that is now precedence and case law that you guys can now use in future. Then when we go to other jurisdictions like the African court, you can actually join collectively against the sanctions that are on one country so that we can also have the same gravitas on the case and eventually do the same in the International Court of Justice. I am not a legal person. So I would need to find out the legal reading as to whether countries can come together as one to put in joint cases against a sanction sender that continues to be a common denominator like the United States. So I'll need to find out that. The second question is, can you remind me of
the question? That says it has been now, there are 19 days for the other bill to be approved, and in this time can Ethiopia take the sponsor to court? But let me add, there's one specific also to you from Sister Asquat. Resolution, I think RES is representing resolution 3430. How is it defended and enforced? Also, who is the entity that can enforce such laws against the US? How likely will it be enforced?
All right, thank you so much. So the first question is that I don't know if you can take legal action against the Parliament of the United States outside the United States Parliament, unless you've got people within the United States who can begin to take the Congress to task as citizens of Ethiopia that are living in the United States, or citizens of Eritrea that are in the United States, then they take the Congress to court for unfairness or a lack of judicial process in their declaration of sanctions. So I know, and I can almost guess, that nobody has been tried in any of these countries that are going to face the sanctions. Ethiopia is being alleged to do something that has never been tested in a court. So that means there's no due process. So what I would suggest is that the citizens of Ethiopia that are living...
Yeah, okay, now it's good. It's good.
So what I would suggest is that the citizens of Ethiopia that are in the United States now need to take the judgments that have already been made against the United States in Iran versus United States in the International Court of Justice. You also need to take the ruling that has been made by the UN Human Rights Council Special Rapporteur who came to Zimbabwe saying that unilateral sanctions are illegal because they lack due process. Take these cases and begin to get your lawyers to try and to get an estoppel or a spoliation for this process that is taking place in the Congress of the United States. Also write letters and petitions to the President of the United States and Congress people to say that the process you're undertaking is illegal because it is punishment without trial. You are punishing people on allegations, therefore violating international law, violating the Bill of Rights, violating the principles that you say as a nation that you stand up for. Then you also warn them that if you do continue and do not desist, we will then sue you in African courts, in the African court, in the International Court of Justice, and eventually hold you accountable for decisions. Then you can also go against them in a civil case to say that you as sponsors of this bill and you as Congress people of America have sat and decided to make decisions that are contrary to international law, in violation of international law, and contravening what you say the United States stands for, a policeman of human rights when you're violators of human rights.
Please unmute yourself.
All right. Okay. Yeah. No, thank you very much, really. I'm sure there are more questions, but I know that you have to run. Just to say that, you know, what Brother Dr. Biniam and Brother Rutendo have shared with us it's a shared challenge that we face all over the world, and especially as an African. This is exactly what Deacon Yosef also told us. If this sanction is imposed on Ethiopia, this is exactly how it looks like. In a way, I think if I can say, every challenge has an opportunity. So these countries, by going through this, also they brought not only they are sharing their challenges, but also the guideline how to fight it. So we really appreciate that, and thank you very much, Brother Rutendo. Yeah.
Thank you, my sister. Thank you, my sister. And I'm sorry that I couldn't stay longer. And let's hope you have more of these. And I promise I'll stay longer. If it wasn't for the fact that I've got meetings pertaining to sanctions, I would stay.
Okay. Now we understand, and we heard you also in the Twitter space. We know that you are committed, and definitely this is not the last time. Okay.
Thank you. Good night. Good night, guys.
Good night. Okay, so we are through with our speakers. We started late, so I took the liberty also to take some time from what is allocated, from what is mentioned as the end time, but also we need to give time for the question and answers. So I really apologize. So let's go straight to the questions. The first question, I think on the last question that Brother Rutendo touched, there are some legal where he said he's not a legal person. So maybe Ambassador David, if you have been following that, you may want to give us more analysis or more answers. You may want to respond on that. While you are preparing, I will go to the questions which are directed to Deacon Yosef Tafari. You're here with us, right? Before I read the questions. Deacon Yosef. Okay. So yeah, the first question is who is from Hermela? It says who is behind the bill, meaning financing or supporting? Do we have a company name? And then it goes on saying we need a company name behind the bill, sponsor of the senators. For instance, Senator Mendez's campaign was sponsored by, she mentioned 3 companies. One is Blackstone Group, Southern Star Shipping Masters. The other one is Garcia Hamilton and Association. And the third one is Alisa's Bakery. Yeah, and then there's another one from NDALC. How should citizens and those outside the country jointly stand to advocate against the bill? Over to you, Deacon Yosef.
Mahlet, please unmute yourself. Mahlet, unmute yourself, please.
Okay, no, I was saying, okay, sorry. You have to unmute Deacon Yosef. He is going to respond to the questions.
Very well. That was an unbelievable discussion. I don't know if I remember anyone ever putting together such a powerful team of panelists. They really have been in-depth, and I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the rest of attendees too. But I want to thank you guys for putting this thing together. It is truly something that needs to be taken as a model, and hopefully that we get to do this again, across the Atlantic as well. So thank you for being such an exemplary, putting this seminar together. I hope it's recorded and posted on social media. Yes, question that Hermela asked. This is obviously, okay, so obviously this is backed by interest groups. Primarily, if you could divide this between the TPLF backing and Egypt. What is obviously, we know, as far as TPLF is concerned, they have a wherewithal. They had all the looted treasure that has been used as a war chest against Ethiopia. And we've seen it throughout last year. The misinformation and all of the avalanche of false narrative that have come about as a result of their money, the ill-gotten money that is now affecting the international media, academic institutions, government policymakers, congressional members, and whatnot. They have, we know that they have the three lobby firms. That's not something that in Europe that you're familiar with, but that's the way how these political campaigns take place here in the United States. And the other one is Egypt. Egypt has been extremely forceful. They also have probably one of the most powerful lobbyist firms from what they're known as a K Street firms. And each individual lobbying firms are paid between $65,000 to $75,000 a month. And one of the key lobbyists representing the interest of Egypt is has somebody who was actually a chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee inside in Congress for many, many years. And one of the influence that they have done is not only that they have co-wrote the, HR6600, but also to make sure that a resolution to really have a teeth to it, some power to it. It goes after the leadership of Congress, which they were able to do. So Senator Bob Mendez and Representative Gregory Meeks, both the Foreign Committee's Affairs Chairman, as I indicated earlier, are captured by these lobbyists. And the second thing is, you need to have, this is key, you need to have co-sponsors that agrees with the resolution, and they become essentially co-author of it. And in the case, for example, of HR 128 that we were able to successfully pass back in 2018, we had over 200 co-sponsor among a body of 435 congressional members. In this case, it only has 5 congressional members that are called authors. However, Egypt's lobbyist firm, led by the ex-congressman Ed Royce, was successful in putting out of the 5, 3 of them were brought by his pressure representing Egypt.
So if you really want to see this, okay, if you really want to see this, clearly this is highly driven by interest groups, and namely TPLF in Egypt. Now, I want the audience also to understand that officially, the administration is saying they don't support HR6600 or the Senate resolution. They're saying that, not only here in the State Department, but as a special envoy, Ambassador David, reconfirmed that in his visit last week with the Ethiopian authorities. But that's the official. This is the way how they play this game. The classic case of the carrot and the stick is essentially this. They make the other branch of government, which has the equal authority in many aspects, not necessarily foreign affairs, but at least they make them draft resolution like this. And so on the other end, they seem to argue that the best way to go about influencing what happens in Ethiopia is through a diplomatic process. They're saying we need some kind of leverage to make our demands heard by the Ethiopian authorities. And that leverage comes in the form of such resolutions. And obviously our point of argument is obvious, and that is, if the president doesn't agree with this, if the State Department openly, in fact, in one of the congressional hearings, the Assistant Secretary of the African Affairs, Ambassador Molly Fee, when she was directly asked when the State Department is going to come about and coming up with a legal determination, in fact, Ethiopia is a state of genocide, she outright rejected that. She said, we will not espouse that. We don't call upon to that. We believe the best way to go about achieving what we're interested to take place in Ethiopia is through a diplomatic means. Now, when you hear that, and it's the Congress asking the question and advancing a resolution advocating for such determination, and then the State Department officially, and this is in the congressional record, and I believe I tweeted the video clip on my Twitter feed, and people are welcome to go and look and just hear word to word how she responded. Then one question, how is it then the congressional part of we know it's an equal branch of government, but yet foreign policy by United States Constitution is virtually the presidential prerogative. That means, and that's why you've got doctrines, the so-called, Truman doctrine, Obama doctrine, Kennedy doctrine. Essentially, foreign policy is really a pleasure of the administration, the White House. Okay, so which essentially, through the instrument of the State Department, impose those policy what's in the minds of the president. And then you've got Congress behind it coming up with these kind of draconian measures that literally opposes what officially they are claiming. We are saying to Congress and said, number one, that this contradicts the administration, which these resolutions are asking and demanding for the administration to comply with the resolution for determining Ethiopia and the way that they would like to be categorized. That actually is contradictory to what the administration believes should have been the course of and the way how they go about this. Now, the other part, which is probably more sensitive to them, is the fact who is the political party that is in power currently? The president is a Democrat, the Senate is run by the Democrats, and the House is run by Democrats. So we have a simple question to the Democratic Party. Why are you embarrassing your own president when he's officially telling you that the best way to deal with Ethiopia is through constructive engagement? So we're using this divide, and could be a ploy, and we shouldn't rule that out, but yet there is a unique opportunity here that, based on the actual record of testimony they have given that they do not believe that Ethiopia should be categorized in such manner. And finally, the question and the second guest asked about how one can participate. We have a petition drive on the change.org. If I may request, maybe Asqual, if you can post that on the chat, a link. Anyone around the world can put this, sign this petition. What does this petition ask? It asks the Speaker of the House not to allow advancing this resolution, HR6600, to come to vote on the floor. And by the way, we will amend it now. Now we've seen the Senate has also advanced S3199 and cleared the committee. Is now queued to go before on the Senate floor. We're going to amend the petition to include also Leader Chuck Schumer, not to bring this for consideration. If you could do that for us, it's extremely helpful. And also, please add your name to hashtag withdraw 6600 on the Twitter campaign. I think from what I've heard yesterday, for the first time, we have exceeded the support that was in the Twitter platform that was promoted by people who are trying to support the resolutions for the first time. And that's a good thing. And I heard some numbers like we have now exceeded them by threefold. I think we need to do that because we have the numbers and the convictions, and I would recommend that we do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deacon Yosef, for that. Really. So I will give Sister Martha. Are you with us? Martha from Zimbabwe. I will give now. I have 2-3 people. Each of you 1 minute to speak, and the petition is now in the chat room, so you can go ahead and copy paste the link or act now as we are here. That's how we can act together, you know, to also to be practical. Sister Martha, did she let Kwame? Sister Martha left?
Oh yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so we have. I'm sorry to make a pressure. Yeah, 1 minute. Sister Martha is from Zimbabwe, who's a sister comrade also with the movement, anti-sanction movement, with the works that Brother Rutendo is doing. So I'll give you 1 minute, and please share with us your view. Thank you.
All right, yeah, 1 minute. I'll do my marathon here. Good evening, and thank you so much for having me. And the team, yes, we have been working hand in hand with Brother Rutendo Matinyarare on the anti-sanctions movement from around 2019 to date. I'll just speak on the unity. I always emphasize on that because it feels and seems like it's each man for himself when it comes to Africa. We've been sanctioned for 21 years. And it's only now that people are coming together, other countries and so forth. We should do away with this mentality of only each country standing up for themselves or pushing their own fight. We need to come together, utilize each other's platforms. We've got so many platforms. We've been fighting this for quite some time. Let us engage one another. Partner with churches, partner with government departments, partner with other organizations, women as well. I know that it always ends up being like a men's affair, but women get affected more. Young people are hired as rebels in Africa, and we are not engaging them to discuss such things. Let us engage women, let us engage our young people, and let us not stop planting a seed. there's always negativity coming from within our countries, and opposition created. Keep on planting the seed. And also another thing is donor dependence. If we can lobby for our own businesses within Africa to support the movements, because the moment that you start depending on donors from Europe, from USA, from other countries, the Chinese, Russia, they come with their terms and conditions, and we will keep on depending on the USA. The reason why right now we are in this whole mess as Africa, we depend on the US. You can't say much, governments can't say much, because they want the World Bank to approve this loan, they want IMF to approve this loan. As long as we are still depending on the US, on Europe and their friends, we will keep on being sanctions, because their foreign policy want us to work in a certain way. So within this 1 minute, I do believe I've touched on what needs to be touched on and utilize the media. I was doing mostly the mobilization and the media side. There is power in numbers. Don't be fooled that marching doesn't work and petition, they do work. Come in numbers, impose your own sanctions, go to their doorsteps with 1,000 women, make sure they stay there and nobody in, nobody out. It does not, being soft, it does not work. You need to come in full force. You need to go out there as people who wants to win. And we are always here. I'm always here with media platforms, with also assisting in whatever way we can to unite, to mobilize. Africa Union, the ECOSOCC, they are always there to assist. I know we call them the toothless dogs whenever we want, but they actually help out in a way. So yeah, that's all I can say within the 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that was really indeed necessary. As I have been saying again and again, we have a shared challenge, so we really have to stand together to fight this. Thank you very much, Sister Marta, for that. Next, Ambassador David, I ask one question on that legal issue. If you are ready, you can respond to that. And after that, Brother Kwame and Sister Shiba, you will be next. 1 minute, each of you, not the ambassador. Okay.
Thank you. This business about expecting US companies to defy their government, and if the government passes a law imposing sanctions to defy that law, is not realistic, because that law will impose penalties on US companies and entities that do not, that go against the sanction regime. So to expect that a US company is going to flout its own country's law and bear penalties for doing so, or take its own government to court, is I don't think it's very realistic. And bear in mind that the UN General Assembly since 1992, every year since 1992, with the vast majority of nations, sometimes only the US, Israel, and maybe one or two others voting against. The UN General Assembly has passed resolutions telling the United States that its sanction regime against Cuba is unlawful, and ordering the United States to remove it. And the United States pays it absolutely no attention. As far as they're concerned, it's just a resolution of the General Assembly. It has no force behind it. Now, if perhaps if it were a resolution of the Security Council, it might be different. Although they would veto it. They have the veto power. So something more powerful is required. The point I was trying to make, the main point I was trying to make, is that Cuba is not a member of CARICOM. In spite of that, but Cuba is a part of the Caribbean. So in spite of the fact that Cuba is not a member of CARICOM, we are so conscious that we are a Caribbean civilization. So Cuba is part of the family of Caribbean nations. And therefore, we give unanimous support to Cuba on this matter of resisting the US sanctions. The African Union is a grouping of some 55 nations, a territory of 12 million square miles, a population of 1.3 billion people. Africa has a GDP that would make it the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world today. So Africa does have some very substantial power. The question is, why, how is it possible for an outsider, a foreign nation, to be imposing an unlawful penalty on a critical member state of the African Union, and the African Union does not come together and close ranks and make it clear, speaking from its position of geopolitical importance and potential economic importance, make it clear that this is a no-no, that Africa will not countenance that, and that there will be consequences. I think really that is where you need to go. I think that yes, the petitioning of the US Congress and the president, all of that is good, but I suspect that there's a geopolitical consideration behind this US policy towards Ethiopia. I think we're being extremely naive if we think that it is just some well-meaning but misguided effort on the part of the US to help resolve the conflict in Ethiopia. I think that's a very naive thinking about this matter. I suspect that there is a definite geopolitical consideration behind the current US policy. So for me, I think African unity in dealing with this matter and sending a message of what Africa and the African Union will not tolerate in relation to its member state. I think that is perhaps the most critical, and that is the one course of action that probably has the greatest potential to bear positive results. And finally, just let me say, I believe, if memory serves me correct, that there is an initiative led by countries like Venezuela and Iran and so forth, countries that are under sanction. There is an initiative to bring together countries that are under sanction to take some kind of collective action. But I'll try to, I do recall hearing about this initiative. I'm trying to see if I could get some more concrete information about how far it has gone. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for that. I do agree 100% with the points that you emphasized, the African unity, those 55 nations, to bring their voice together as one should not be underestimated. And that's where actually really result can be achieved. Related to that, I wanted to ask also, and I'm sure His Excellency Denise Kohde would like to respond to that, and I'll add this question. In March 2021, the Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, your president, Your Excellency, in Brussels, actually, he called for Africa and Caribbean to join hands in fighting against sanctions by bringing the example of countries like member states like Eritrea, Zimbabwe, and Burundi, what they are going through. And also in September 2021, during the first Caribbean CARICOM AU summit, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, again has called for the leaders of Africa and Caribbean to support Cuba in its fight against sanctions. Actually, to be particular, it was about the COVID-19, about the pandemic. So my question is, what does it take for these two institutions to come together and fight against sanction, which they are facing together? And how long will the African Union will stand, just by the corner and see when its member states suffer? Yeah, that's my question. But before you answer, while you are pondering on that, I want to bring, probably they might have a question or a comment or a suggestion for 1 minute. Sister Shiba and Brother Kwame. Sister Shiba, can you go first so that you can answer all? Sister Shiba, if you're there. Do we have her, Sister Shiba?
Yes, I'm here. I was waiting to be unmuted. Hi, Mahlet.
Okay, yeah.
And hello, everyone. Thank you for a wonderful discussion. It's been really remarkable hearing all the speakers today. I hope we have more of this for sure. So my question / comments is very similar to what you were just asking, Mahlet, which is I think at this point, well, it's two-part and it's not really directed at anybody. So anyone who wants to really answer this would be great. We recognize that African countries are under an immense amount of threat from Western powers, specifically the US and others, through collaboration and cooperation with international agencies such as the UN, who have not been fair, in my estimation, specifically in this case with Ethiopia, but as we heard Brother Rutendo talk about Zimbabwe and so many other countries, we've seen this repeated so many times. So the solution is definitely unity, and we understand that as Pan-Africans. That's why we're here. And we believe strongly that it's a power of numbers, like our sister said earlier, that's going to make the bigger difference. So short term, rising together is the solution. And as challenging as that is, because, it's very simple to say all countries should come together, Africans must unite. I agree with that wholeheartedly. That's a dream. So the first question is, what are the practical steps each of you leaders here today that you think should be the first, let's say, the first fundamental steps to be taken to create this united synergy to fight against the aggression? That's the first part of the question. And the second is, how do we start the process of eliminating the threat of sanctions by standing together and getting to a point where we're not worried about sanctions anymore? In other words, when African countries are codependent as opposed to being dependent on European countries or other Western countries for various reasons. If it's true that what we really seek is our complete freedom and independence and self-determination, isn't it high time we stop, going through these cycles of fighting against Western aggression through these sanctions and whatever else it is that threatens our economies, threatens the African people's freedoms? And I understand, as I'm asking, that this is not something that's practical overnight, but it should be our goal. And I feel as though while we're hearing these cases about all these countries and we're working so hard, advocating and getting together to fight against, so-called sanctions over and over again, what do we need to do as leaders in the diaspora, leaders of so many African countries and nations to really prepare ourselves to stop being threatened and stand together in solidarity so that we don't have, or we can minimize the impacts of such sanctions. So that's my two-part question. I hope you wrote that one. Mahlet, I'll be happy to repeat it. But I just wanted to say thank you to all of you. It's been a fascinating discussion. And I'll leave it there for sake of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Shiva. Those are really valid points to look at. Kwame, quickly, Brother Kwame. Yeah. If you can unmute him, Teshale.
I think he closed. He can unmute himself.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mahlet. Thank you for the organizers of this meeting. Very, very wonderful speakers, and they always have spoken touching on the important, very, very important aspect. And it is only timely that we should approach these sanctions as a united Africa. That is very, very important. That is the message actually, which I can take from all the speakers. Whatever they have said, it is very, very important that we understand what it means to be African, to be an African. And the attack on any of us, if we stand by the side when they are attacking one of the countries, we should understand that they will come and attack the other. And then when they come and attack the other, then that's when they will know that we were standing on the side where they're attacking our brother and we were not speaking. Like Zimbabwe, Martha said, has been under sanctions for the last 20 years. But what are other African countries, been doing? Whatever they have been doing, it has not been enough. We know South Africa maybe has helped in a certain way, whereby in the 2000s, I think it was 2012, Tony Blair was trying to convince the then president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, to intervene and allow Britain to come and attack Zimbabwe. But Thabo Mbeki refused during that time, who was the president of South Africa. So they have done some things, but this is not enough. And we have to understand also that imperialism, these sanctions are about imperialism and colonialism, the continuation. I think we have to be candid about this. We have to be straight about what is happening. That these sanctions are about colonization. They want to continue the colonization, the domination, the exploitation of our continent and our people. So how can we defeat this imperialism and domination and exploitation and colonization, which they want to continue these people? We have to be together. We have to act together. We, especially the civil society, the African civil society, I think we are going to change. We are going to be very instrumental in changing the outlook of our continent in the next 15 years. So we have to look at things in a timely manner. The presidents, the African heads of state, they may have their limitations in certain ways. They don't want to speak against the United States and these colonial powers which want to continue to dominate. But I think that we as African people and civil society, we can go a long way in organizing and even backing up those leaders and supporting them. People like Prime Minister Abiy, and then the presidents in Mali, the presidents in in Zimbabwe, in supporting them, showing them, going in as a coalition, and then showing them that you have our support. And I believe that they would also be elated, and they would be happy and then get a chance, or maybe we may get a chance also, that they would come and give us support in our struggle as we are fighting for the whole continent. So my message to the imperialists or the colonial nations that want to continue to dominate the world is that the world has changed, and I think that they need to change with the world. The colonial nations who want to continue to dominate the world need to change, because the world has tremendously changed, and it is better for us to cooperate than to continue the attitude of superiority complex and then to continue this superiority complex and domination and exploitation. You know, it is better for nations to work together in this 21st century and share in the resources instead of having one nation, you know, consuming 25% of the resources of the world when it has only 5% of the population. So this is very unsustainable and it cannot last, because as time goes on, the people will understand and they become conscious of what is going on as today has happened. The other message which I would have for the African heads of state is that the African heads of state, whether it is in Ghana, whether it is in Egypt, whether it is in Morocco, Senegal, Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, Congo, they have to work together. We have to work together for the good of us, for the good of our people, and we have to speak out. The African heads of state sitting down all the time and keeping quiet when our continent is sinking, is being, you know, is facing aggression, because these sanctions are affecting the people. You know, they take food from people's tables. You know, they take money from people's pockets. They, normal people, the civilians who are not even in government, they are the ones who are suffering against this. So I would appeal to people like Nana Addo, you know, of Ghana, you know, Buhari of Nigeria, Ramaphosa of Zimbabwe, you know, of South Africa, and all of them, they have to stand up and speak out. They have, if it is a summit, an emergency summit that needs to be called at the African Union, just to condemn these sanctions. Let let the summit, you know, happen. If it is the mobilization of the African civil society as a people, the presidents, they can do this. We can do this, and we have a continental day of rallying against these sanctions, whereby all African people come out to their, you know, parliaments and in support of their governments, and then speaking out against, you know, these sanctions. This thing can be done. So African heads of state, they have to speak out in support of the people, because it's the people at the end of the day who are going to, you know, to suffer. And then the other message which I would have is that the Pan-African world and African people have to work in unison. So like Martha mentioned, we cannot afford to isolate ourselves. We cannot afford to fight for only one nation. We are a big landmass of the continent. So every time we choose out a small part and we say we are fighting, you know, for that, our enemies are just on the door. You know, Ethiopia is just bordering with Djibouti and Eritrea. Djibouti, where the biggest military base of the United States is. So it is very dangerous. So we can win in the interim, like in the first round, definitely. You know, Ethiopia won this struggle. But these guys, because they were defeated, they went back. Now they are crafting new, you know, measures. They are crafting new, they're using new tactics now. They still want to infiltrate, because in the first round they were defeated. So these are all things I think we can look at as Africans all over the continent. This continent belongs to all of us. So if you are in Ethiopia, the resources on the continent, whether they are in Congo, they belong.
Kwame, you need to wrap it up.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mahlet. So we have to act together. We have to move together, and then we have to fight together. And the time, I think the time is very, you know, opportune if we look at what is going on around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brother Kwame, for those points indeed. Excellency, I'm really sorry to put you on hold. Can you please come in now? Over to you, Excellency. Dennis, Ambassador.
Can please forgive me for my voice?
I just want to say that His Excellency Denise Kohde was not feeling well, but he really knew how important this was, so he made it tonight. Thank you very much, for being here. So please go.
Thank you, Mahlet, for inviting me to this very important discussion. I've really learned a lot. I was listening to all my colleagues who are making speeches, including Your Excellencies. And I want to start by responding to a question raised by my sister Betty. What do we need to do? I think one of the solutions that we have started doing is this kind of forum, where we engage and talk about issues that are facing us. Today is our good brother, neighbor, Ethiopia, tomorrow it will be Kenya. As Kwame says, nobody knows who next. So I think we must begin to engage. We must begin to dialogue. We must begin to talk and talk frankly about our issues and not favor our issues. If we are wrong, we are wrong. If we are right, we are right. And how do we correct it from there? I think this is, for me, is the first stage. And I was very happy again when I was in Ghana and we were talking about unconstitutional change of governments. And this was a discussion by high-level African Union leaders. It's very critical because we must understand where are we going wrong? What is it that we need to do? And you cannot do that without talking at those issues and asking yourself questions. The second point I also want to say before I respond to some of those issues, solutions of Africa will not come from African leaders. It will come from all of us. Each of us has a role. Mahlet has a role, my brother Kwame has a role, everybody else who is in this platform has a role. If you are in the civil society, you are in the NGO, you are in whatever sector you are, because Africa belongs to all of us and the leaders are only holding a mantle for us. The other point that I also want to bring in is yes, my brother Kwame has talked about Pan-Africanism spirit, which I believe in so much. But we also have to be genuine about ourselves. And I was writing something as you're speaking. If you want to be respected, you must respect yourself first. What do I mean by this? If we want the West to respect us as Africans, we must respect ourselves. There are certain things that we are doing in the process of leadership, which is giving us a negative, image. And this is what is giving the international, the foreigners opportunity to come in and study taking time to us. As we say, the question that was asked by, the question that has been raised by Betty, that we need solidarity. Yes, we need solidarity not only when it comes to sanctions, but also when it comes to bad governance practice. We must have a governance which is responsible to the people, a governance which is respected. We must respect the rule of law. We must respect human rights. We must enhance democracy. We must provide basic rights to our people. Now, this is where we are losing it as Africa. So in terms of looking for solidarity, let us not look for things which are affecting us only, but let us also talk about things which are our future. How are our government being governed? How are our leaders behaving? I have raised this. Now we are ordinary people, we can meet in the streets and talk. But when one of us becomes a president, he becomes or she becomes like a small god. Why? What changes? What makes us become different people living in different environments without realizing that we are actually leading the people? Our leaders must be servants of the people. Our leaders must ensure that human rights, of the basic human rights of the people are provided. And therefore, this will not give room for any international community to come in. So when we talk about solidarity, my brothers, your excellencies who are present, we should also analyze ourselves. There's a saying which says that when you're pointing a finger, watch the thumb. The thumb is pointing at you. What is it that we are doing wrong or which we are not doing in the right way that is causing all these problems? Now, that solidarity will be very useful for us if we also look at it inwardly, not only outwardly. For me, I'm not for the idea of foreigners or international community coming to sort our problems, because we know we can solve them. Now, the question that has been raised by Mahlet, the example he gave about my president, he's outgoing, he has only 3 months to stay in the office, but he's a very happy outgoing president. And he's joking about it. He's even busy organizing who should step over, which will make the country comfortable. This is what we need in Africa, because we don't want presidents who violate the law and then change them to be last president. He's a young man. He's almost 1 year older than me or so, but he's very happy to go home, and he's very happy that he has finished his term. Secondly, I gave an example of 2019 when he had a problem with the opposition leader again on the results of elections. But only shaking of hands in front of his office has brought lasting peace to Kenya up to date. Now, you see, these little things that we overlook as leaders is what is making the international community create image about us. Let us not find room. Let us not create space for them to start to dictate terms for us. I'm looking for a day when our leaders will be talking about, I'm doing this for our African people. I'm doing this for my Kenyan people. I'm doing this for so that the leadership is not him or her. The leadership is about the people. Now, unless colleagues, we start to inwardly criticize and analyze ourselves like that. Unless we begin to sort out our own problems by ourselves, unless we start to talk about issues that are affecting us, just like families, the international community will continue to have avenues for trying to make life difficult for us even more. Now, you talked about, I think you mentioned about the discussion of what my president said when he was in the Caribbean meetings. Yes, it is important for us to have this solidarity. It's very important for us, and this is the meaning of the African Union. And please, when you talk about the African Union, you should understand the combination. What is the African Union? And therefore, there are certain issues which make it difficult for them to find solutions to. But as I said in my initial statement, is that I'm glad that even our leaders are beginning to realize that some of these issues, we must talk about them. It doesn't matter whether you're a member of the African Union, but if certain things are not going on well, then we have to talk about them. For example, when you see military coup taking place in Mali, in Guinea, you know, you cannot condemn it because even military people are citizens of that country. Now, when they're tired of a certain leadership in place, what do you want them to do? Therefore, we must begin to talk about these issues objectively and genuinely and openly, and say for us to have a comfortable country, for us to have to live in harmony, we must have our standard of leadership pegged to a certain level. For us to get respect from the international international community, we must behave like this. As I conclude, and I want to leave this as a thought for all of us, what made our late hero, the late Mandela, become a hero? Did he invent any mobile phone? Did he invent any vehicle? Did he do anything that extraordinary? No, he simply behaved well, full stop. This is what now made him to become a hero, and all of us are emulating that. So my appeal is yes, let us not allow the international community to control us, but let us also show them that, look, guys, we can sort out our own problems. We know what they are, and let them see how we have done it, and them respect us. But I'm not saying that sanctions should be given on people because certain people, certain powers want certain things done in their own way. That one is actually demeaning to us as Africans, especially in this age and era where we are 50, 60 years old after independence. I hope I've tried to wrap up some of the concerns that you raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Indeed, you have touched every question that we have asked. Thank you very much. Really, the only thing that I learned, yeah, we are late by even almost 1 hour, but it was really important to have this discussion. Definitely what it shows us is we need more of this. So we definitely will have more of this. Now we have come to end this session, but before that, I will invite my colleague, if he is with us, here with us, to make a brief closing remark for us, and then I would like to thank some people, behind me who have really helped to organize this. Yeah, Atokota, over to you.
Thank you, Mahlet. Thank you very much. Ambassador Kohde really wrapped it up very well. He really pointed out the main points that were said in this very interesting webinar. Allow me to thank, in the name of Defend Ethiopia Task Force, all the panelists, and particularly Mahlet, who has really been at the forefront in initiating and organizing this. So thank you, everyone. I think it was really a very vibrant, educational and instructive session. A number of possible actions and lessons to be learned from previous cases have surfaced. I don't want to go into listing them now, as we have overtaken the allotted time. The main point of this webinar was to really get some awareness and take some lessons from previous cases, and I think we have achieved that. There was a lot of talk about call for African countries to unite and form some sort of an anti-sanction movement or organization. The international law violation of sanctions was mentioned a couple of times. Now, in terms of action, there is a petition running from Deacon team that we should all follow. In Defend Ethiopia, we have also sent a couple of letters, and we're going to run campaigns, and we definitely will have similar webinars, a follow-up webinar of this one, focusing more on the actions to take as we have 17 days left. I would like to take this opportunity to thank also or to encourage rather our compatriots in the US who are doing what they can to have this bill cancelled. So with this, I will just wrap up by thanking again everyone who has participated to this. I think it was really instructive, and a number of follow-up actions will surface. The video will be on our website, which is at defendethiopia.com. So in a couple of days, it should be there. So I invite you to go and check our website. With this being said, the next webinar, we will also announce it hopefully very soon, and it will be action-oriented. Again, thank you everyone for having this successful webinar, which was instructive. Again, thanks for your participation. Back to you, Mahlet.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Tuktau. Yeah, so I would like to thank you, our speakers. Not only were them on board on short notice to be here with us, but also they have stretched and spared their time because we definitely took 1 hour and actually more than 1 hour from what originally advertised. And so thank you very much for valuing the importance of this topic and for being with us. We really do appreciate that. And also thank you for Defend Ethiopia Task Force Europe Steering Committee, our IT behind, Shaler, Tari, everyone. They are members of the Steering Committee of Defend Ethiopia Task Force, and also Dr. Azeb, and also Sister Askwar, who actually a participant turned to an IT assistant today. She's from the Ethiopian Diaspora Civic Council. That's, the meaning of what it means to work together. So yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you very much. Have a blessed evening and have a good weekend.
Thank you too. Bye.